we get him grabbing her ass. And not just like the little pat from earlier, like a full-on grab. And then shortly after that, we have him trying to move her hand onto his ass, which continued on this trend with this show where they have Louie do something that I find reprehensible, but then immediately have him do something that makes me laugh. Still though, it's just plain old assault. Welcome back to another episode of The Rank. I'm John, and today we're going to be ranking the next episode of Taxi. And for those of you who are new to the show, I'm just going to give you a brief agenda here. We start off with the potent notables, which are just a couple interesting facts or tidbits that I found out about the episode or series. Then I do the episode overview, which is where I talk about everything that happened in the episode, so spoiler alert. And then I do the rank, where I rank the episode in 5 categories on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best, all to find out what are the best sitcoms of all time. And today we're going to be ranking the 20th episode of the second season, titled Shut It Down Part 2, written by Howard Gewirtz and Ian Praiser and directed by Jimmy Burrows. So let's find out how this one stacked up, starting with the potent notables.
Potent notables.
So this 42nd episode of Taxi was released February 5th, 1980, and Taxi dropped from 12th to 13th this week in the ratings, going from a 25.2 to a 24.3 rating. In digging around for potent notables, I found this article that was referencing like 2 other articles from 1979. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't find the actual articles from 1979, but a few things jumped out to me. One was that Mary Lou Henner had a meet and greet with cabbies in 1979, and apparently there was like a huge line to meet her. 2, these same cabbies that were lined up to meet her were interviewed for this same article, and they said that Elaine Nardo and Louie De Palma were the most relatable characters in the show. That strikes me as pretty sad that Louie would be one of the most relatable. And the other thing was that it referenced another interview with James Burrows where he said, Taxi is not the kind of show that has jokes in it. I feel like that explains a lot. Anyway, those are the potent notables. Let's go to the episode overview. Well, everyone is back at work after the strike from last episode, and Louie is in a really good mood. Bobby's gonna warn him though. He's gonna say, hey, if these negotiations with Elaine don't work, they're gonna be right back out there picketing. And then Bobby asks Louie, what did you actually concede to anyway? And Louie's like, hey, I'm not telling you. Haven't you ever heard of the Taft-Hartley Act? Of course, then we get a cute bit from Jim where he's like, yeah, I know that. I saw that act on the Ed Sullivan Show a few times. Taft is the goofy one, right? Thanks, Jim. Now, clearly none of the other cabbies know that Elaine has agreed to go on a date with Louie in exchange for these concessions that she asked for in the last episode. And Louie isn't talking about it either. But boy, is he excited. And we see that Elaine actually isn't in the garage, and for some reason, Tony is the one who knows why. And he says that Elaine told him that she's just taking a night off because she needed a night to clear her head. But Louie's cheeriness is making Alex feel like something is afoot. He can't quite put his finger on it as Louie brings 3 bottles of aftershave to the group of Bobby, Alex, Tony, and Jim to find out their opinion on which aftershave smells the best. Of course, he doesn't say which smells the best, he just says which one is the best, so Jim naturally picks up the first bottle and starts drinking from it, which obviously cracked me up, but sadly is the last scene that we're gonna have Jim in. Between that and Laka not being in this episode at all, you'd think that might not bode well for this one, at least as far as laughs are concerned. We'll find out. But Louie's going back to his cage and he's getting all dressed up, and Alex is like, what are you getting all dressed up for, Louie? And Louie's like, a social engagement then. And you know, it's pretty clear that Alex has started to piece it together. And so he's like, I'm gonna go check on Elaine. So when he arrives at Elaine's apartment, she's drinking, she's on the couch in her bathrobe and she's getting crunk. And when he knocks at the door, she doesn't know it's Alex and she's like, no, I'm not ready yet, you're early, go away. So like any person would do hearing that, Alex just opens the door and walks in. So Elaine's gonna try to hide the fact that she's gonna be going out with Louie, but Alex knows. You know, Alex knows everything. Am I the only person who kind of finds Alex annoying? Like, why is he always in everybody's business? And then he pretends like he doesn't want to be. There's gotta be someone else out there. Can you just let me know in the comments? I feel like everybody's gonna be like, no, Alex is the best, but there's gotta be somebody out there that agrees with me. Now, when Louie does eventually show up, Elaine asks Alex to just hold him off while she gets ready. So Alex decides to act like he's Elaine's father. Now, I would say this is a weird scene, but it actually turned out kind of cute/silly. I especially liked when Alex knocks on Elaine's bedroom door and says, Elaine, your young snake is here. Elaine eventually comes out of the bedroom and we see what took her so long to get ready. She had to make herself look as unattractive as she could. To do so, she ties her hair back super tight and puts on a whole lot of layers, including a giant puffy winter coat. Louie is obviously disappointed, but he's undeterred in taking her out. I mean, as he's told Alex, He's actually hired a bunch of people to be around them and make sure the date goes well. So he's not going to give up. But before they leave, Alex is going to threaten Louie and say, if you make a move on Elaine, I'm going to kill you. To which Louie replies, it'll take a week for the coroner to pry the smile off my face. Now, this joke really made me laugh in the moment, but in retrospect, why would a coroner be prying a smile off a face? And how would that happen? Well, Alex eventually leaves, and Elaine's gonna want to call her kids before she goes on the date. And this part to me is kind of fucked up. She calls them and she's like crying and telling them to remember her as she was before they left today. I mean, imagine being the kids in this scenario. That would be terrifying. Though I will admit that the show brought me out of it quicker than I expected when they have Louie say to Elaine, Nardo, I don't think you're going into this with the right attitude. Finally, after Elaine is done terrifying her children, they head out. And then as they're heading out, Louie pats her on the ass. She immediately turns around and slaps him, which I was like, good. So I'm annoyed with Louie in the moment, but then he says, the ice is broken, right after the slap, and in spite of myself, I laughed. So Louie's decided to take Elaine to an Hawaiian joint. We've got a band playing music, and he's ordering her a monsoon, which is an alcoholic drink. Also, and I haven't mentioned this, but Louie is really dressed up for this date. Like, the dude looks good. So he's put together a nice date for her so far, including writing a conversation for them because he knew that conversation was going to be hard. He has 2 copies, one for him, one for her, and she starts it off by reading, I guess you know I have 2 kids. And then Louie has a line that's some philosophical saying from a long time ago, to which Elaine actually genuinely replies, that's interesting. But then Louie's like, read. She looks down at the paper and she reads, that's interesting. This whole bit was a lot of fun because when they get their drinks, Louie's like, let's skip to the end because it's not lining up anyway. He's like, this is your line. Elaine's like, it's not my line. He's like, no, it is. So she has to read, you have beautiful eyes. And then after Louie says, thank you, she reads, now let's tear up this piece of paper and dance, Stallion, which was a fantastic callback to the previous episode where he said that she had to call him Stallion on the date. They do actually get up and dance with Louie recommending a tango. And the music was accordingly goofy. But the best part was when Louie expertly swings Elaine into position so that they're in the position to tango, and his head is like right on her breasts. So she leans down so that her cheek is touching his cheek instead. But then we get him grabbing her ass. And not just like the little pat from earlier, like a full-on grab. And then shortly after that, we have him trying to move her hand onto his ass, which continued on this trend with this show where they have Louie do something that I find reprehensible, but then immediately have him do something that makes me laugh. Still though, it's just plain old assault. So the date comes to an end and we're brought into the middle of a joke that's being told by Louie, which ends with, just get me what the rooster got. And then he just cracks up. Now, of course, it's not funny. You're just hearing the punchline. You don't know the joke. But then he just keeps laughing. And then the amount of laughter that happens from him actually made me laugh. So we're back at Elaine's apartment and she clearly just wants it to be over. She wants to go inside and be done with this whole thing. Although we do find out that she took some Valium, which she washed down with 3 alcoholic drinks and then had 6 more drinks at the restaurant. And Louie's like, man, I would think that would kill somebody. And she was like, yeah, I thought so too. Which did make me laugh, but in retrospect, also feels kind of messed up. I mean, she's got kids, right? The most shocking thing and what actually kind of annoyed me was that I started to feel for Louie a little bit. Like my head kept being like, you know, he went to a lot of trouble for this date. You could have tried to enjoy it. And then I'd chastise myself and just be like, brain, no, this is just creepy all the way around. Thankfully though, Louie just keeps trying to get into Elaine's place, which erased my empathy. Elaine keeps saying no, she just wants to go home, take a shower, and burn her clothes. And then Louie's gonna start trying to manipulate. If you could have just relaxed a little, you may have had a good time. And I just thought maybe you might change your mind about me. He does this 3 separate times. The first 2 times he says something sad and walks away, and Elaine says nothing. And Louie is just shocked. There's no like, no, wait, Louie. Basically, he's surprised that his manipulation hasn't worked. But the 3rd time's the charm because he's gonna go back to her and with tears in his eyes, he's gonna say, you may think that you can't hurt my feelings, but you can. So this is the one that works. She does end up stopping him and she's like, you know what? I did actually start having a good time on the date. So Louie tries to sneak in her door. She of course stops him, but then he's like, you gotta give me a kiss at the end of the date. Like not just like a, oh, come on, right? And then she says no, and he's like, okay. No, he just like continues to pressure her for a kiss. And for some reason, Elaine decides, you know what, I'll give him a quick peck. He says he's gonna keep his arms at his side, he's got his eyes closed, I'll just do it real quick. So she does it, and then he just like grabs her and like rolls around the ground with her. I was like, okay, so he's just essaying her. That's just what we're doing. And that's how we end. So let's find out how it ranked.
Elaine.
So the rank is where I rank the episode based on 5 categories: story, acting, dialogue, episode coherence, and character relatability. I rank it on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. And then I have a laugh counter where I tally up the amount of times the episode made me laugh out loud. 1 point per laugh out loud gets added to the score. But before I dive into the rankings, I just want to say, if you're enjoying this episode, please leave a like down below. It really does help me out. But without further ado, the first category is story. And it's a continuation story from the last episode, but it's surprisingly well encapsulated. The story is really just the date between Louie and Elaine. I thought it was a pretty good story, so I gave it a 4.25. Then we go to acting. I thought Mary Lou Henner was pretty good in this one, and Danny DeVito was kind of incredible. And since the episode is really just a Danny and Mary Lou highlight, and he was excellent and she was really good, I gave it a 4.5. So this brings us to dialogue. It was a reasonably funny episode, but there were a lot of essay-style jokes in here. Like Louie is grabbing her ass and forcing kisses. And this is after he manipulates her to go on a date with him in the first place as a quid pro quo. It's just yikes. Anyway, I ended up giving it a 2.75 because for all the stuff that I didn't like about the episode, I think it actually made me laugh more than any Taxi episode has previously. So let's go to episode coherence. Louie remains a creep. Elaine is still too nice. Alex involves himself in everything. And as far as the coherence of the episode and story in general, it's really good. I don't think you would have even needed to see the previous episode to understand what was going on in this one. So for that reason, I gave it a 5. So that brings us to character relatability. Well, I think that creepy men could relate to Louie, and I can certainly see how people could relate to Elaine. I think the hardest part to relate to is that I'd like to believe that this kind of thing wouldn't happen anymore, although I'm sure it still definitely does. But at the very least, there wouldn't be a sitcom episode nowadays joking about it. Anyway, I gave it a 3.5. So that brings us to the laugh counter, and it got me 17 times, which means it officially made me laugh the most of any Taxi episode.
I know what kind of man you are.
I don't know how to feel about that, but anyway, it brings the grand total of the episode to a 37, which makes it a holy grail. But as for the series average, it moves it up a bit to a 26.1, moving further into the mediocre tier. And if you're ranking along with me, please put your rankings down in the comments. I'd love to read them, and I'm super curious about the laugh counter. So thanks for listening and or watching. Check out the other Taxi episodes that I've ranked, or any of the other sitcom episodes that I've done, or movie episodes. For an updated list of rankings, you can check out the website at therankpodcast.com. You can email me there as well at john@therankpodcast.com. Remember to subscribe, comment, and like. And if you really want to support the show, you can become a patron at patreon.com/therankpodcast. But I'll leave you with this. Why did Louie start out as an English major? Because he heard it was all about essays. S-A's. It'll take a week to get... It'll take a week to get the prior... I can't fucking say it.